My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. How may a traumatic child and young adulthood transform the experiencer and bring forth the wisdom to heal oneself and share that healing with others? My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Phoebe Leona, found refuge in the healing powers of movement, dance, and introspection. Phoebe Leona is a dancer, speaker, author, yoga teacher, and transformational guide who helps us feel more embodied through somatic movement and expanded awareness practices to become more empowered in who we are becoming, and are having a greater sense of belonging. Her website is phoebeleona.com, and she joins me this week to share her experiences, profound wisdom, and new book, Dear Radiant One, an emotional recovery story and transformational guide to embody the dance of life. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Phoebe Leona. Welcome, Phoebe.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Victor.
And thank you for joining us and sharing your message. So please share with us your early life and the events that shaped your understanding of relationships to self and with others.
Thank you. My childhood was very much full of love. There was a lot of love between my parents, with me. I had, family members outside of my immediate family that was full of love, but it was also rather confusing. And what I mean by that is my father, he had done 2 tours of Vietnam. So he had very severe PTSD, which we didn't even have that term at the time in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. But what we realized was that he had very severe PTSD, and he was basically self-medicating with very hard drugs, crack, heroin, at very different parts of his life. And so when he was going into flashbacks, or he was, angry, and he was, self-medicating with alcohol or drugs, he turned into a very, very different person. So I learned at a very early age. So my parents divorced, I think, when I was 8 years old. And I lived with my father. So my father was my primary caregiver from 8 to 15. And so during that time, it was really him, as my primary caregiver. I was an only child. And so I had these very loving moments with my father. But then when he would get triggered from his PTSD, he would turn into somebody completely different, a scary man, an angry man, a very chaotic, unpredictable man. And there were a lot of incidences that I witnessed physical abuse with my mother, with his girlfriends after they were separated, and just a lot of rage and confusion. And as I said, chaos. And so to have that really beautiful, unconditional love with him, and then to have this basically monster in unpredictable moments, was rather confusing. And so that was my blueprint for a lot of my relationships moving forward into my adult life. I attracted various relationships that had that uncertainty, that unpredictable, that chaos, also involving drug use with the other, partner. So it's been a journey detangling from it the last 9 years, I would say, since my father passed away and my divorce, that I talk about a bit more in my book, Dear Radiant One. That it's been a beautiful journey to understand the duality, or maybe the non-duality of love, that I got to experience at an early age.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the events that transpired, but when did you begin to dance, and what does dancing and movement mean to you?
Thank you for asking me that. Well, I began to dance. My mom jokes that I danced before I walked because I would be in a jolly jumper, suspended before I could actually walk around. And I would just bounce up and down to the music while she was making dinner every night. So I was a born dancer. In terms of my path, labeled as a dancer, I was dancing in classes, at a very early age of 4. And I became a professional dancer in New York City for years. And it was everything to me. And what I'm realizing is that it brought me so much joy. It brought me so much joy to move my body in through space. It brought me so much joy to bring people into that space. Every night after dinner, one of my favorite things I did with my father was I got to give dance performances after dinner. So that was my time to shine. And it was also really healing for me, which I didn't realize until many, many years later when I was studying yoga and realizing, doing a little bit more of the trauma work that I was doing, was how our issues are in our tissues, meaning we hold those old stories in our physical body. And so when we don't release them, we don't have a physical experience with them to release the chemicals of stress. We can hold on to them and they can become us. And so at a very early age, intuitively, when I was having those moments with my father where he was scary, I just said, okay, I'm going to my room. I'm closing the door. I'm turning the music on and I'm dancing. And that was so healing for me because I didn't carry, yes, I'm carrying the story that I'm telling in a book, but I didn't carry that trauma in my body in the way that I really could have. It could have been a lot worse for me. Yes, I unpacked a lot of trauma as an adult, but it could have been a lot worse if I didn't have that beautiful therapy of dance.
Now, when you were in high school, as you mentioned, your home situation once again changed dramatically with the divorce of your mother and father. Please share with us what happened and how it affected you.
So my parents actually were divorced at 8, and I lived with my father from 8 to 15. And so what was happening in high school was he came to me when I think I was in 8th grade, at the end of my 8th grade. And now at that time, this was where I was shining, that I was the captain of Palms. I had boyfriends. I had a lot of friends. I was the lead in a musical. I was like a very high achiever and I was very extroverted. So when my father came to me in 8th grade and he said, listen, I have a drug problem. I need to go to rehab. And he explained what it was and how he had been using drugs for most of his life, even before his tours of Vietnam. And he was explaining to me about all this, and it was really healing for him, I'm sure. But that whole summer, we were in and out, or he was, I felt I was as well, in and out of rehab. So he kept having relapses and like really trying to get good. But then he would have really, really bad relapses where he was getting even more, I would say, like more angry and rageful and abusive. And he also disappeared for periods of time. And so I was trying to balance this life of being this high achiever, everything is fine on the outside world. But then at home, my home life was just utter chaos. And it was getting worse because now I have friends who are driving around in their cars and could just stop by at any time. And I couldn't hide this story at home anymore. And so it just came to a head. And so there was a weekend in particular that my dad had not shown up for days. He left to go buy drugs or steal drugs. I'm not sure the whole story because he was dealing drugs at that time too, but he had disappeared for multiple days. And so I finally called my mom because I was also hiding this from my mom too, because I didn't want her to worry. And I just said, listen, Dad hasn't been home for days. And she came to get me, and we decided this is not the life that I can live anymore. So I made a decision at 15 years old to leave my father. And what I'll also say here is that I had so much loyalty to my father. I loved him so much because when we had those beautiful unconditional love moments, they overpowered this confusing side of him. And so I felt really loyal to stay with him and protect him, and felt like if I stayed in his life, everything would be okay. He would have a purpose to live. So when I left home at 15, I had a lot of guilt and shame around that. Like I disappointed him. Like I let him down as well as myself because I wasn't there for somebody who needed it.
And then your dad disappeared for a number of years.
Yeah. So after I left, I went to live with my grandmother in Texas. I was in Maryland prior to that. And when I came back, he disappeared. He had been evicted from his home, the home that we were living in. And he just disappeared. Now, he was still in contact with his parents, and I didn't have a great relationship with them, but I would get little ominous, updates on him. He was in jail. He's homeless. He is in the hospital for a heart attack. And so I would get these little updates. And I did have a period, I don't even think I shared this in the book, but in college, he did call me after he had a heart attack. And I thought that was the last time I would hear from him. And he asked me for money. And I said, I'm a starving artist, college student. And you also need to go get help. So I sent him a number for rehab again. So he wasn't in my life for 18 years, aside from that one phone call when I was in college. And I will never forget the day he called me in 2009 on Father's Day. And he was sober. He was completely rehabilitated in that, well, I wouldn't say completely, but that he had been diagnosed as PTSD. He had been awarded 100% mentally, emotionally, all of it, disabled by the government. And he was living a very humble but good life. And we had 4 absolutely beautiful years together. Of healing, of getting to know each other again, to kind of connect the dots of all those years that we missed, to connect his dots, because even when I was a child, he was like foggy about some of the things that had happened. So I filled in the blanks for him. It was truly, truly a gift that I will hold with me the rest of my life.
Now, prior to your father returning, having the experience of him leaving, of your mom divorcing him, how did you feel about committed relationships at that point?
Oh my. How did I feel about committed relationships? I wanted to believe in them. I wanted to believe in them because when my parents were together, there was so much love between the two of them. Now, my mom needed to leave because it was not healthy for her anymore. So I carried this romantic version of what I thought romantic relationships could be, but I also carried that blueprint of the dysfunction. And so I was also a dancer and had this vision of being this big, beautiful dancing star. So relationships weren't like a romantic committed relationship wasn't high on my list because I had these big dreams for myself. But at the same time, there was a piece of me that felt like I needed it. And so I did meet somebody in college and we ended up having a long relationship for 15 years. We got married. And he was very loving to me. There was also elements of that dysfunction that I witnessed in my parents' marriage and the relationship between my father and myself. But there was a lot of love there. But I think what really came down to it was the dysfunction. And it was time when my father died in January 2013. I think that my ex-husband saw the weight that I had carried for so many years and how our marriage was a symbol of that. And that, he was going down a path that he didn't want me to continue on. And so he ended the marriage 2 months later.
So your father passes away after returning into your life at age 32 after 4 years.
Yeah.
Shortly thereafter, your husband divorces you.
Mm-hmm.
How did that make you feel about abandonment?
It triggered that abandonment wound very, very deeply. I always knew it was there. I had that abandonment wound on my mother, for leaving the marriage and leaving me with my father, and various other, stories that were underneath our relationship my whole life. There was the abandonment wound of my father. There was the abandonment wound that I had on myself of leaving. And so when my father did leave this life, and when this person who had been my rock for 15 years was choosing to leave me, it was like cutting it open and putting a knife in and twisting it a little bit. It was deep. And it took me a really long time. And, 9 years out, I feel like I'm just coming to a place that I can trust within myself that I'm not going to abandon myself. Um, I have the best of intentions not to abandon others. And I know that the people that love me and see me for who I am will not abandon me. And if it looks like it from the outside, it's, there's something else there. It's not that victim role that I'm carrying on that I used to carry on.
After these great losses, how did your healing path begin?
Well, that year, it was January, my father died. March was when my marriage was ending. The rest of that rest of the year was basically a domino effect of just the rest of my life being torn apart. So I had to lose my dream home, the home that we had just bought a year prior. I had to put my dog down. My own health was, deteriorating for a period of time. And the only thing that was stable at that point was my job, but my job wasn't fulfilling me anymore. And I also knew that I needed to shift there. And so I basically had a breakdown in October that year where I was like, okay, what is going on? I want to have some sort of control over my life again, because I felt like everything was being taken away. And that deep abandonment wound was digging deeper and deeper in. So I wanted to claim some sort of control over my life and start to heal my life. And so I had an invitation to go to Costa Rica for a couple of days to check out a retreat center. And I basically stayed. Like, I came back for a couple of weeks in between, and then I went back again, and I stayed for 9 months. And that 9 months was a death and a rebirth of my old life. And it was really that beginning of the healing journey for me.
What were some of the lessons that you learned on that healing path?
I learned a lot about my shadows. I learned a lot about, I think up until that point, especially that year of 2013, where everything was happening to me. And when I was in Costa Rica and I was doing this healing work all alone, I didn't have any family there. I didn't have any friends. Of course, I made friends there, but I was all alone, and it was me and it was my shadow. And I really got to see how I played the role, right? So things weren't actually happening to me, but I was also a co-creator in the chaos, in the loss. And I started to see how I could reframe that. How could I co-create in a different way? How I enabled people in some ways, how I enabled myself in other ways from not, going to live my biggest, powerful self. And that was the main lesson that I learned. I also learned the lesson of trusting myself, how to be there. Like I said, the abandonment wound was very deep, and I learned how to trust myself. So I didn't have to feel when other people left that I would be abandoned, because here I was here. I was always here.
And how did you turn all of this into great successes and open the path of healing to others?
So during that time in Costa Rica, I also knew that I had to have some sort of joy come out of this. I knew that it couldn't just be the story that I was going to have. I needed to shift it in some way. And so I saw that I was in this big gap of this, what I call the space in between, that place of your old life and that decision of what is going to be the new life. And I knew as I was going through it that other people also have this place that they live in, this space of, do I want to leave my job? Or they make that choice and leave the job, and they're free falling, figuring out what the next job is or their next, calling is in life. The relationship, the loss of a family member, like I was, making a big physical move in their life, moving to a new city or home. And I thought, I would love to provide a space for people just to experience themselves in that space, right? What are the old parts of themselves they want to bring with them? What are the new parts of themselves they want to explore? And so I looked at, okay, that's what I want to provide a space. How am I going to do that? Well, I was teaching yoga at the time. I had been teaching for about 10 years at that point. So, and I loved it. So I said, okay, I have this beautiful tool that I can get people to do. And I also love to travel. So let's build retreats where people can come out of their old life and experience in this container of a retreat, other parts of the world, other parts of themselves to go deeper and then integrate them back into, quote unquote, the normal life or their new life, or make that decision to leave the old life and make that big leap of faith with that strength and confidence within themselves.
And you actually have an event coming up this November in Costa Rica.
I do. Oh, Costa Rica keeps calling me back. So I have been going back there for leading retreats for the past 8 years. And I always try to find somewhere a little bit different, just to bring, because I have a lot of returning people who love the experience and also love to go back to places, but they also love to explore new places too. So we are going back to Costa Rica. I will be holding a retreat in November 12th through the 19th. And I'm excited because this one's going to be a little different. I've been using the tool of yoga for the last 8 years through these retreats, but I've been shifting more and more to my own somatic movement practice, Movement 109, where there's a bit of dancing there. There's a lot of grounding. There's a lot of building safety in the body and trust in the body. And we're also integrating the practices that I share in the book, Dear Radiant One. So it's going to be very similar experience than what we've done, but the tool of yoga will be less. It'll be more of these other movement practices, other expanded awareness practices like journal writing, meditation, that we're going to dive in a bit more deeply into.
My guest is Phoebe Leona. Her book, Dear Radiant One, an emotional recovery story and transformational guide to embody the dance of life. Phoebe, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and your amazing work.
Oh, thank you. So everyone can find my book at Amazon and really wherever good books are sold. And you can also find me at my website, and my book is there too, phoebeleona.com. I have a link to all of the providers there. And we also have a bigger vision of the book. So if you feel called to share and support the bigger vision, you can do so at my website, phoebeleona.com. And I'm on social media. Again, my name is pretty easy to find on Facebook and Instagram.
And we'll be back with more of Phoebe after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Phoebe Leona. Her book is called Dear Radiant One, an emotional recovery story and transformational guide to embody the dance of life. Phoebe, what made you want to write Dear Radiant One?
As I was speaking before about that year of 2013 and how life was happening to me, that was the perspective I had at that time. I also knew it was happening for me for a reason, that it wasn't just my story that I needed to write, because I started to write these short stories, it kind of as a journal entry, essentially, of trying to process what was actually happening and why I got there. Why was it happening at that time and space? And what were all the events that were leading up to me having that experience? And so I started to write for me But I also knew, even in the midst of that, even in the midst of all of this loss and grief, that there was something bigger, that I needed to share this story for others. And so I started to write very, like I said, more like journal entries that year, and then the following years. And 2016, I believe, a few years after, I was still in it. I was still going through my healing journey, but I felt like, okay, it's time. It's time to flip the script and write this book for others. And so I wrote a first draft, but I also knew if it was going to be shared out into the world, that I needed to share it with my mother, because my mother was still in my life. We had a relationship that was good. But there were some stories about her that didn't look so great. And I had done my own work, and we still are, the two of us are still doing our inner work together. But I wanted to make sure that she wouldn't feel unsafe having these words and these stories out there, that, it wouldn't ruin the relationship that we had in any way, or make her feel, like I said, unsafe or unprotected. So I had her read it and she approved. She texted me back and she said, "Thank you for not making me out to be a horrible mother." And then I needed to sit out on the shelf, because what I realized was it was still too raw. Like, what I was feeling was still too raw, and to have an editor look at it and say, "Let's move this section here, don't take this here," I was going to take it really personally. So I knew I needed to do more of my own personal journey of healing before I feel confident again and feel strong and trust that what the story is, why is it necessary for other people to read it, that my intention was clear, that it wasn't just woe's me story, but it was actually to help others. I needed to be really clear with that, and I needed to be really confident in my voice and that where I was in the healing process. And so just before everything happened in 2020, I said, okay, this is the winter that I'm going to sit. I'm going to write this book again, because I had that first draft, but I knew that there was a lot there that I needed to move around. And so March was sort of my month that I was going to come back from Bali and start writing. And well, you know the story of what happened. And then, just dealing with the chaos of what we were all collectively feeling. So I really had to put it on the shelf a little bit longer. And then January 2021, I said, this is it. This is what I'm doing. And it's time. And it's time for other people to hear the story too, because I felt like this was the time that people were ready to hear my story.
I love the way you present it in the Dear Radiant One. You share your healing path with a series of letters written to each of the aspects that you healed, and check-ins that aid the reader in examining their own feelings about these aspects. How did you decide on that format?
So the first draft that I did was more of the story and very chronological. But what I was realizing, a couple of things I realized was, one, that I was dealing with childhood trauma. And when I was experiencing that and unpacking that through my healing story, I was realizing when we're in and experiencing trauma, it's not linear. When we're going into something like a flashback, we're going back into time and space. We are feeling those feelings as if they're happening in our present moment. So I wanted to create that. So it wasn't this story chronologically. I wanted to dance around in time a bit and not feel like it was, hard to follow or chaotic. So that was one reason I needed to find a way to shift time and space. The other was I was finding that I was having some blocks about sharing really vulnerable moments with, somebody out there reading my book. But I've always written I've always written in my journal since I was a very, very young girl. And so writing a letter in like a journal felt safe. And then I was thinking, what I'm really doing is I'm writing letters to emotions, because I have some situations there that I need to make friends with. I need to make friends with fear. I need to make friends with anger, because anger was an emotion that I wasn't allowed to feel because I witnessed my father being so angry, and it was hurtful to other people and to himself. And so I bottled that up and I pushed it down. So I needed to bring up anger and say, hey, how can we make friends here? And so I started to just write as an exercise to myself, letters to the emotions. And then I found I felt a lot more comfortable to share these vulnerable moments and to share the story in this way. And then it was also a way to shift the lens to the reader. So after each letter, what I do is I talk a little bit about the emotion and how it shows up in the subtle body. I use the language of the chakra system, the subtle body, energetic body system. And so I relate the chakra system to the emotions, the shadow, what we call the shadow emotions being like fear and anger and guilt and shame. And then the lighter emotions, what we call joy, gratitude, love, connection. And so I flip that to the reader to say, okay, how do you deal with anger? How do you deal with fear? How do you not allow yourself joy? How do you not allow yourself these feelings of confidence? And that's where I invite the reader into their own check-in point and their own practices.
Please give our listeners a taste of some of these amazing letters. With so many grieving loss since the onset of COVID and loss on so many other levels, please start with your letter to grief.
My letter to grief. Okay. Dear grief, as I write this, you were sitting quite close to me. I lost another loved one this week. Gabby was my best friend who was in my life since first grade when we bonded over our white stockings with red hearts on the school playground. She was such a fashionista even back then. We became best friends in third grade when we were in Mrs. Smith's class together and realized she lived just a half a block away from me. That was the school year when I needed a friend most after my parents split up. She was a constant in terms of the love we had for each other. Even though we fluttered in and out of each other's lives over time, I knew even when she was grounded by her parents, a bribe with Pringles would get her to escape and come to my home. We would listen to music and dance together. And as adults, she would always be a phone call away, even in the middle of the night when I felt alone. I loved her like a sister, unconditionally. I can't even really begin to explain the relationship that I had with this soul or how I'm feeling now, knowing she is no longer of this world. But having to go through this process with you again, grief, I think I'm beginning to understand you a bit better. Grief, I know what I know of you is you hold everything in the experience of you. Depression, numbness, joy, laughter, anger, guilt, gratitude, fear, acceptance, all of it. You shook me to my core when I lost my dad the second time when he officially left his body. These last 8 years, I have somehow felt his presence and support in ways that I have never felt when he was on this earth. Because of that, I feel way more at peace about Gabs. Even though it makes no sense at all that she had, at age 43, my age, is now gone, having died in her sleep from a potentially treatable autoimmune disease. It is strange as I write this, I weirdly sense this unfolding of events, just as I did unconsciously months before the passing of my dad.
Thank you. I'm feeling it for you right now.
Thank you. Yeah.
We had talked offline about how so many are experiencing the fear of abandonment. Would you talk about that letter, please?
Sure. So before I read, what I had realized with that fear and abandonment were best friends. And so this is my letter to fear. Some of my letter to fear. Dear fear, you kept me from doing some amazing things in my life. You have always known how to play your cards with me. I create a bond with someone and then you take them away from me in an instant. Fear of abandonment. that's your full name to me. I saw abandonment in all its forms as a child: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. Mom left me alone with Dad. He left me in all the ways through his flashbacks, his drug use, and then his actual disappearance for 16 years. I felt abandoned by the universe during these times, with no one to listen, see, or support me. In 2013, abandonment stripped everything away from me. My dad, my husband, my home, my pets, my health, my stability, my safety, my trust in people, and myself. It left me feeling hollow and depleted from my heart being ripped out of my body. Fear, you lingered after abandonment destroyed my life. And you convinced me everyone was a threat. Everyone would leave me. And I would always have to fend for myself. You triggered the feeling that my heart could be ripped out again whenever anyone got close. I felt my tethered little heart pulsating with you while trying to be strong, to anchor within me. The thing is, I figured you out. I figured you both out. I'm on a path of building my home within myself. So now that when anyone is taken away again, I know I'll be okay.
And after each of these letters, you have a check-in where the reader can work with these feelings. Tell us a little bit about the check-ins for this.
Well, for abandonment and fear, what I look at first is like I said, I turn that lens in and I explain a little bit more about this emotion. And looking at it in the chakra system, it's the root chakra. This is where we feel safe in the body. This is where we can trust ourselves. We can trust others. Any sort of trust issues, right? If we don't have that, fear is on the other side of that. And so what I invite the reader into is to check in and say, how do you feel safe in your body? Where does that fear, if there is fear, where does it sit? Because, what we look at in the chakra system is, yes, it's the energy in the body are generally like in locations of the body. And so root chakra, for instance, is our feet, our legs, the base of our pelvis. But we can also experience fear in other parts of our body energetically, right? It could be the beating of our hearts going faster, right? Almost like an anxiety attack because we're so afraid. It could be the shoulders jumping up and, drawing up into the ears. It could be, bracing yourself with your hands or your feet or whatever it might be. So I ask these questions of how does fear sit in your body when you experience it? So it starts with a bit of that inquiry. And then I also invite in this particular section, the reader to write their own letter to fear, to make friends with fear, and to also have fear write the letter back to them. Because what I have found, the more and more work that I've been doing with writing these letters, is that these emotions just want to be seen and heard and felt too. And so when we give them that space to write the letter, right, of course, we're the ones physically writing it, but we're channeling that energy of fear or of anger to let them be seen and heard and felt. And so that's where we start to build the friendship with them.
And it's like what we say about getting to know other people. Have the conversation rather than the argument.
Yeah.
Learn through conversation.
Exactly. I mean, when we have these stories about fear, we have these stories we have about anger, these stories about shame and guilt, and sometimes they're not the full truth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
After these, you share a series of letters on the qualities of healing and understanding, and we're going to share a couple of those when we come back. My guest is Phoebe Leona. Her book is called Dear Radiant One, an emotional recovery story and transformational guide to embody the dance of life. We'll be back with more after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
My simple solution to the problem was remove people from the scene and help them feel safer.
In response to attacks against Asian Americans, Maddie Park raised over $250,000 to donate cab rides to the Asian community.
There is so much more work to be done. We really need to come together and tackle this issue as a community.
Support the Asian community. Learn how at lovehasnolabels.com. Brought to you by Love Has No Labels and the Ad Council.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Phoebe Leona. Her book, Dear Radiant One, an emotional recovery story and transformational guide to embody the dance of life. So, Phoebe, in the last segment, we were talking about the book you were writing to the various emotions, the mixed emotions. Now, let's talk to the qualities of healing and understanding. Your first letter is a letter to gratitude and appreciation. Tell us about that, please.
I think that I was always a grateful child. Even those moments that, I was having these challenges in my family, I was grateful that I had this connection with my father. I was grateful that I had, even though I wasn't living with my mom, this relationship with her. So I did have this sense of gratitude. But of course, I'll read a little bit again of the letter, but I think that I lost my way for a little bit of time. I think most of us do in our teenage years and 20s.
And our 40s and 50s and 60s. So yes.
Yes. We're constantly being reminded, right? So here's a little bit from my letter, Gratitude and Appreciation. Dear Gratitude and Appreciation, It took courage for me to invite you in during those darker periods of my life. I did it, though. I was taught at a very young age to send thank you letters after receiving gifts for birthdays and Christmas. I made it a point not just to say a blanket statement, but rather express why I was happy to receive someone's thoughtful gifts. The practice of you was both instilled in me for the better part of my life. In many ways, this book is really an honor and acknowledgement of you, gratitude, and appreciation through everything I've experienced. The dark, the light, the laughs, the tears, the joy, the anger, the shame, the confidence, all of it. You both have been humming underneath in this whole time. With that said, I don't know how much I hung out with you during my teen years, as I was pretty pissed my life circumstances of losing my childhood. I lost my home because of Dad's crack problem, left my high school to live in Texas so I would be safe, came back to live with my mom and stepdad, which was a horrible transition, and left my high school again because my stepdad was going to medical school in DC. Because of all that, I was forced to go to therapy because I was labeled the crazy one, despite keeping it relatively together through all of my hardships. On top of the normal teenage angst, awkwardness, stress, and drama, I did try to make the best of all of it and stay positive. I can say, though, that I do not remember feeling either of you all too often through that period of my life. I'm guessing that in general, not too many teenagers connect with you during this time. Do you just lay low during those years and hope we find our way back to you later in life?
Wonderful. Your next letter is to trust and patience.
Yeah. Dear Trust and Patience, there are so many ways to look at the two of you. Where shall I start? My relationship with you is rather a complicated one. Let's start with you, Trust. I feel like we were pretty tight for a while when I was very young. You were my link to intuition. As a child, I was extremely intuitive, which was a blessing for a little bit because you kept me safe. But then I felt we got our signals crossed and it felt more like a curse. When I was very young, I trusted the people I was supposed to trust. My parents, my mom's side of the family being my grandpa Bob, grandma, my aunts. I did not feel good around my dad's parents or his brother. I always got bad feelings being around them. There were several times I got car sick going to see them. I felt in my gut I could not stomach having to be around them when they said awful things to me about how I wasn't perfect like my older half-sister who got straight A's, won swimming meets, and did whatever it was that I wasn't doing. I also hated that I could not bring my friends or even talk about my friends simply because they were a different color than me or from a different country. I also felt that the stress of my mom and my dad, who had to white knuckle their way through the conversations with my grandparents, I often wondered, why did we have to go at all? I trusted warm people and could immediately trust myself to feel when to steer away from the colder people, particularly the grown-ups. I felt when it was safe to go on adventures with my friends in our neighborhood parks or just beyond the perimeters into hidden trails. Things got complicated when the people I felt were warm and could trust, like my mom and dad, began to deceive me. The night they split up, my contract with you, Trust, felt null and void. I was still grateful for you in the moments you and intuition kept me safe during Dad's episodes, but our relationship shifted. I felt moments before he went into his flashbacks, he flipped the switch into rage. Trust. You were there leading me to intuition to get out of the way and take cover. However, the messages you sent me are what made me feel cursed. Your voice was so strong and powerful that I began to think I was creating these moments. So after a while, I turned your voice down and stopped listening to you. You were still there, though, which now I'm grateful for. You kept me safe in so many ways and gave me amazing opportunities along the journey.
And as we shared, each of these letters is followed by a check-in for the reader to work with these feelings and process them through. Each of your chapters start with your title letter, Dear Radiant One. Who are you writing to in this way?
I'm writing to the reader. I'm writing to whoever's on the other side of that page. And the funny thing is, and I share this in the introduction of the book, is that this was not the original title. Dear Radiant One was not the original title. It was a couple of actually different other, I'll actually talk about one of them in the book. I have the story around it, but when my publisher sat to me and said, okay, it has to be really simple and direct and kind of get to the essence of this book, I said, okay, well, I am writing letters here. And we're writing a letter. Really, this whole book is a love letter to the reader. And so let's see who this is. And the last story that I share, I close the letter with shine on, radiant one, shine on. And so I thought, that is who I'm writing. I'm writing to the radiant one. And so these letters turned into writing the reader, the dear radiant one. And now I just want to say a little something funny that I didn't realize until after we chose the title of the book, was that my name, Phoebe, actually means bright, radiant one.
You were writing to yourself. Wonderful.
I did not even know that, but yes.
Absolutely. Phoebe, what are you most proud of?
What am I most proud of? That's a really interesting question. I've actually been focusing on claiming this word proud recently. I actually wrote it in my journal today, proud. I want to reclaim this word. So thank you for that question. In this moment, I'm proud that I'm living my authentic voice. I'm proud that I'm speaking about these secrets that I kind of harbored for so many years to protect others. But what I realized was that, that cliche of the truth will set you free is so absolutely true. The truth does set you free. It frees other people as well. And so I'm so proud that I had the strength and the confidence to share these stories, to hold that space for dear radiant one, the reader, to experience their own stories from that strength and confidence that I am embodying right now.
Tell us about the event coming up in November in Costa Rica.
Yes. So we have a retreat happening again, November 12th through the 19th. And as I mentioned earlier in my story, this is a space that I love to hold. I absolutely love holding space for people to experience a deeper version of themselves. And so for so many years, I used the tool of yoga to get people into that deeper exploration of themselves. And now I will be guiding them, yes, through a little bit of a yoga practice in the morning, but also the practices that are in this book, those check-ins that we spoke about today, the movement practice, Movement 109, that I've developed with a very grounding, healing movement in the body, going through the chakra system to recognize the patterns we hold and to free ourselves from those patterns we've been carrying and those stories we've been carrying. So I'm really excited to hold this container for other people. And if it's okay, I feel called to let your audience know that I'll honor a special for them. So if they're listening and they want to join me in Costa Rica, I will extend a special. They can, let's call it OMTimes. That will be our coupon code. I will set that up.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. That's wonderful. My guest, Phoebe Leona, her book, Dear Radiant One, an emotional recovery story, and transformational guide to embody the dance of life. Phoebe, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
Okay, they can find my book wherever books are sold online. They can also go to my website, PhoebeLeona.com. There's a link there. It'll show you all of the beautiful places that carry Dear Radiant One and also the bigger vision that I have for this experience. Thank you so much, Victor.
Oh, you're welcome. I was going to ask you, what's next for you?
What is next for me? So it's happening now and it's going to be expanding. So as I mentioned to you before we recorded here today, having this background of dance, I knew that this book wasn't just a book that you have on your shelf and you read and you put it away. I wanted it to be something that people experience. So the retreat in Costa Rica is one way, but another way that I'm creating a multidimensional experience is to have these book readings where I'm not only reading, like I shared with you and your audience today, but I'm actually dancing to the words. And so I'm working with other artists who are painting behind me and reading some of the letters as poetry. And it's building and growing in a really beautiful way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wonderful wisdom and your message today.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be with you. And I definitely feel like we are kindred spirits in lots of ways. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.